Okay. Something that occurs to me. We, of course, don't have perfect parents in the world. They're human like us, and they're just doing their best, in a sense. Well, we trust they are. And it leaves us with certain blind spots. I mean, a trivial, you might think, trivial thing. I don't remember us having a brush at home to clean the toilet with. You know, one of those brushes that you put next to the toilet seat. So I never used such. We might have had, but I certainly never used it, and I was never taught to use it, put it that way. Did I ever clean the toilets at home? I don't think I did, no. I only did it when I became an adult, and it was necessary as a husband or whatever, And so I remember my in-laws were appalled that I'd left the toilet basin marked and not used the brush. They told their daughter, my wife, goodness, that was my second wife too. It took a long time to get to me, didn't it? I was married to the first one 18 years. So I must have been somewhere around 40 something, like 47, 48, before I ever considered such. Seems bizarre to me now, but there you are. You see, we can be doing things, or rather in this case not doing things, that really shock and appall people around us, and quite blind to it. I mean, I may be kidding myself, quite a good citizen in other ways, but not meeting this requirement that's considered so normal and civilized and reasonable. And, it's like when you come into a different culture, isn't it? I mean, as an Englishman, you sit on a table because it's simply, and the table's there and it's solid enough, and the table's not messy or wet or something. You sit on it if you need to. But apparently you don't do this in New Zealand because of the Maori culture principle that it's wrong to be sitting on a table. It's possibly rooted in a poor hygiene. We need to be more hygienic. And that may be something to do with, it occurs to me, the more basic style of life that perhaps the Maori had before the European came. And it was therefore very wise not to sit on the table. I mean, if you think about it, it could cause contamination, couldn't it, to the food and so forth. So it's a very reasonable rule, a rule of etiquette, if you like, but foreign to you, and you might not realize this and be really upsetting the local people because you're flouting one of their rules of etiquette and so on. So all I'm saying here is it's good to attempt to be sensitive to how the other person is seeing you, and of course to have a relationship with them whereby they can, in some sense, in a kind way, let you know what's important to them and that you're doing wrongly from their perspective. And well, it can save a lot of inharmony and stress. That's quite unnecessary, isn't it? That doesn't mean to say you have to adopt their culture, their religion, their view of everything, but it's as well to know what you're doing that has a problematic consequence with them, so that you can address the situation appropriately and not offend. I don't mean that you need to be sacrificing your own culture for theirs. You respect differences, but in some sense you respect differences, and well, you avoid any unnecessary frictions, put it that way. Some differences will have to remain. They can't be just set aside and submitted to, because it might be very important to you. The reverse. It might be etiquette for you to accept all food that's put before you, but for me I can't do that because I'm vegetarian, and it would so upset me to have deliberately been eating meat that's a big ask. And so in some sense I would appeal to my host that, oh, I'm very sorry, I'm vegetarian, and at least in the societies I know, he would take that to mean, well, that's too important for him to simply be sociable and eat what I put before him. Perhaps I'll just leave the meat off. Is that all right? Oh yes, that's helpful. Thank you so much. And everything's solved, isn't it? And we're understanding. So we need to be understanding of the needs of those around us. Nothing new there, is there? And we need to be charitable and forgiving and flexible where we realize that some things are important, both sides, and we can't simply do the same thing as we might normally. We suspend our culture to some extent, to the extent that we can do so in kindness, to meet the other person's requirements. In as far as we can, not in as far as we can't. Some things we just can't, and they can't compromise either. So we agree to differ, and we find some sort of way of relating or not relating to each other that's going to accommodate this as best we can. And I mean the obvious, still respecting each other as persons and with needs that we are concerned for. We might not be able to meet those needs personally, but we appreciate their situation in some kind way. We are filled with loving kindness and compassion and as much understanding as we can muster. Well, nothing new there, is there? Thank you, Heavenly Father. Now, I don't mean you have to take on board their validation of their rule necessarily. I mean, you might well do because you feel that the validation's still true. But for instance, in the Maori culture, I get the impression that there's no way you interrupt someone who's older than you when they're talking. Now, this has the disadvantage that certain people drone on forever and you can't really shut them up. And I mean, when I say forever, they might talk for 20 minutes and you hope they'd just talk for 3, especially in some public speaking situation. But you can't interrupt them. Only someone who's older than them, presumably, could, in some sense, bring them to heel. So I'm not saying that you have to follow this etiquette because it's important to them. But you do need to know that if you're going to break the rule, it's not going to be received well, and they will feel justified in some condemnation, perhaps, of you in breaking that rule, because it's normal for them to keep such a rule. So, in some sense, you need to tread carefully. This doesn't mean that, when I'm confronted with my Muslim friend, that I have to change my life and eat, halal meat. he's not requiring it because he realizes I'm not a Muslim. I wouldn't deliberately, well, of course I wouldn't anyway because I'm vegetarian, but I wouldn't want to deliberately be doing something in front of him that was contrary to his comfort and well-being as he sees it, unless it was very necessary for some reason. Yeah, I mean, for argument's sake, if the kids are eating something, well, I can't think of such an example, but you see what I mean, I think. And in particular, it's very important, isn't it, when it comes to things like religion, which can be very important. You can be doing something that's absolute anathema to the other person, whether it's interrupting in a service, for instance, which some Christians felt was absolute terrible thing to do. You can't interrupt the sermon with a question from the audience, or the congregation rather, you know. And no doubt I've upset a lot of people because I've had such inclination. Yes. Marshall's a bit of a menace socially. Too loud, too noisy, too open, as I would see it, too honest. But they don't see it that way. They just see it as too rude. Sometimes it's actually of value to go against the flow. But tricky, make sure you get it right, or the comeback on you could be heavy from those who think it's not right. Well, I'm not saying I think that I believe in something like apartheid, where we separate our cultures from each other, but I can see the necessity of distance between some people with different ideas to other people, else we have a war situation and a great discontent. And I think we have to sort of come to some sort of truce where there are boundaries that we don't cross, territories that we allocate to some extent. You know, people have their own home, their own, ideally, we understand it, their own room to retire to and so forth. They need to, and in some sense that's respected, that it's their place and there in that location they will do their thing and not necessarily yours. There are common ground areas, and there are areas that are not common but private. And the rules of privacy, the cultural rules of privacy seem to be in that direction, don't they? We feel governments don't have the right to impose on our privacy. There's some sort of area where we say, no, the government don't have a right to this. And the government may be arguing that they do have a right because it's for the security of the nation in some way, and they'd better be very right and very clearly right, or we will tend to resist it. And so we get a tension between governments and citizens. And we try to find a form of government that is some acceptable compromise where a person does have their privacy, but the state has enough authority, not just power, but authority, accepted authority, by which I mean accepted by the people in general, that they do have the right to do certain things. For argument's sake, there's a disturbance that's worrying the neighbours. Police think there's a concern for danger to life, and they make a forced entry. it needs to be in very specified circumstances and done in a certain specified way. But privacy will be invaded in such circumstances. And the degree to which that happens turns on what's acceptable to the people, well, it depends on a power situation actually between the state and the individual. And our theories of democracy and good government and bad government are all about that, aren't they? Well, that's the particular situation of conflict. But in a more normal, everyday way, we're constantly faced with people who have different needs and different expectations, perhaps to what we expect or perhaps what we do know of. And we have to find the best harmony that we can in order to, if you like, maximize the blessing to all, welfare in general. Even that is just an adopted principle. There's nothing to say that this is the principle that will be adopted, only that we can imagine that perhaps that is the best. So we try and bring peace to discord, to inconsistencies, to inharmonies we bring harmony. And that's very necessary for our well-being. So it seems to be a good rule, doesn't it? Your Heavenly Father. Well, you see, it's more fundamental than you think, this etiquette rules of social behavior. It's what the universe, the material universe, may well be about. That it's preparing us in that we learn to find harmony, the best solutions to differences in persons. That if we're going to be in a heaven, an eternal heaven of blessedness, we're not going to have everybody the same. We don't want to be an army of drones in heaven, identical persons. That's really not company for anybody. We're going to be very varied, but armed fully with knowing how to live in harmony despite differences. And we're learning that. Some of us may be learning it better than others, of course, here on Earth, in this cosmos, this universe. And indeed, what we take to be ethics seems to be primarily concerned with trying to find a harmony within communities and between communities and so forth. And if we don't manage to become masters of that, well, we're not eligible for the kingdom of heaven, because we would bring harm and discord and damage into it. We have to be able, we have to be ready to cope with heaven in a way that heaven won't need to cast us out. And I suppose in a way that's what the Genesis story is about. You know, the cardinal problem there seemed to be doubting what God said, for whatever reason. You know, the serpent, you know, saying, you know, surely God has not said. Well, he didn't quite say that, but I mean, you know, he queried it. And somehow this doubt about God introduced an inharmony that was not acceptable in heaven. I mean, it might be acceptable here on earth. We're outside the garden, if you like. We're learning, tasting of good and evil and seeing the consequences. But it's not acceptable in heaven because trusting in the goodness of God and the validity of God, your God, is very necessary to overcome all these spiritual problems. So what might seem at first glance a bit trivial, why were they cast out, perhaps is more fundamental than we thought. That inharmony is a disaster to heaven. Is it a great conformity? No, conformity is a forced harmony. We're valuing something that's from within the person, a desire for harmony, a desire for peace and love and blessedness and so on, such that our behaviour, though free, is definitely guided accordingly. You know, we're free to embrace harmony, which is not the same as conformity. It rather relies on such qualities as tolerance and understanding and forgiveness and seeing things from another's point of view and empathy and sympathy and all sorts of qualities that we strive to understand here, or need to understand here, put it that way, in order to be, well, an adult, quite honestly, a fully developed adult, which most of us, of course, are not. But, well, where there's life, there's hope, and in particular, where there's God, there is great hope. I won't say certainty in this dimension, but tremendous hope. Certainly enough hope. Certainly, hang on, I hesitate to use that word. Shall I just say enough hope to get us through? Thank you, Heavenly Father. Love you. Thank you, Heavenly Father. So there's nothing trivial really in life. We're blessed if we have a great presence and awareness with every detail of the day, from the perspective of what is creation teaching us at this moment? What's the implications of this moment for life eternal? Now, in a sense, simply the good habit, as I understand it, of seeking out whatsoever is good and lovely, thinking on these things, which leads us into thankfulness to God, saying thank you. You know, literally going through the action of saying thank you, Heavenly Father, for this. This awareness, this application of the consciousness in an attitude of, or in a relationship with God, an awareness of our relationship, that God is homeschooling us day and night in every detail. A concept, you see, that he's a simply wonderful parent. I think you will find, I'm so sure, but practice it and find out for yourself, that such a practice will greatly increase your faith will escalate, your hope will escalate, your joy, Everything good comes from it. And if I was to give an explanation, you see, I'm saying that the practice of being thankful to God, seeking out what is good all the time, all the time seeking out what is good, gives you the greatest blessing, a blessing that escalates at an astonishing rate, where you enter into the realms of miracle living, and dare I say beyond. And you see, it's sort of illustrated even in this recording, this specific one, because I felt I was saying very little. It was trivial. What am I talking about this for? As I got into the recording, where's this going, Father? Well, it's going to that which is paramountly important, an understanding and a way of handling that which brings us into life eternal. Is your consciousness applied in the right way, in a continual gratitude to God, makes you the best student on earth. And it's so simple, so open to everyone. So enter into this realization that God is astonishingly able to bring us through. Just be a good student. You're made to be able to be an absolutely wonderful student, a wonderful child of God. Wonderful children of God mature very fast. Such a joy, such a blessing to see life flourish in this way. Wow. Thank you, Heavenly Father.